She leaned close and whispered, "One secret won't hurt anyone." And in that moment, everything I thought I knew about love changed. The first time I saw her, it was in a small, sunlit corner of a quiet coffee shop, the kind where the hum of conversation feels like a soft backdrop to your own thoughts. I had come in seeking nothing more than a moment's escape from the endless demands of my day. But the universe had other plans. She was there, seated alone by the window, a cup of tea cradled in her hands, her posture calm and measured, like someone who belonged in every space she entered without needing to assert it. What struck me first wasn't her beauty. It was the way she moved, the subtle grace in every gesture. Her fingers traced the rim of the cup absent-mindedly, her eyes briefly scanning a worn paperback, and for a moment, I could have sworn time slowed around her. There was something familiar about her presence, though I knew I had never met her before. It was in the tilt of her head, the gentle curve of her smile, the quiet authority that softened rather than commanded. She seemed to exist in a world both close enough to reach and just out of reach, and I found myself drawn to it without knowing why. I took a seat across the room, pretending to focus on my laptop, but my attention kept wandering back to her. The sunlight caught the strands of her hair, making them glow like liquid gold, and I noticed a faint scent of something floral and comforting, lavender, maybe, or vanilla, hovering around her. My chest tightened in an inexplicable way, a mixture of curiosity and anticipation. I was aware of the absurdity of being so affected by a stranger, yet there was an undeniable pull, a quiet magnetic tension that made the air feel warmer whenever she moved. Then our eyes met. It wasn't a prolonged stare, just a fleeting brush, a brief acknowledgement that somehow spoke more than words ever could. I felt my heartbeat pick up slightly, a nervous thrill surging through me, and in that instant, I sensed a silent understanding, or perhaps an invitation, that left me both unsettled and intrigued. She smiled, a small, almost imperceptible curve of her lips, and for a second, the world outside the coffee shop seemed to dissolve, leaving only her presence, calm yet electric, in my awareness. I wanted to approach, to speak, to do something that would justify the storm of emotions already stirring within me. But I didn't. I sat frozen, letting the moment linger, savoring it as though pulling it too close might shatter its fragile perfection. In that simple, quiet connection, a seed was planted, the beginning of something I couldn't yet name, a story that would unravel slowly, tenderly, in ways I could not yet imagine. And so, in that sunlit corner, with the scent of tea and the soft murmur of conversation around us, I realized I had been caught by something far older and more insistent than attraction. It was curiosity, yes, but more than that. It was recognition, a silent acknowledgement that the life I thought I understood was about to change, softly, irresistibly, and forever. The next few days, I found myself noticing her everywhere I went, or at least, that's what I told myself. Maybe it was coincidence, maybe fate, or maybe just my imagination stretching the lines of reality. But every time our paths crossed, something shifted in the air, subtle and magnetic, like a quiet current tugging us toward each other. It happened first in a library, that hushed, sunlit room lined with shelves that smelled faintly of paper and dust. I had been flipping through a book when I heard a soft voice, calm but playful. "You're looking at that all wrong," she said, gesturing at the passage I had just struggled with. I looked up, startled, and there she was, her eyes bright with amusement, her smile effortless and disarming. I laughed nervously, realizing she had caught me in my self-consciousness, and somehow, it didn't feel embarrassing. It felt welcoming. She moved with an unassuming grace, sliding into the chair across from me, just close enough to share the same space without crowding it. Her presence felt grounding, like a quiet anchor in the middle of my scattered thoughts. Our conversation began cautiously, polite at first, exchanging simple observations about books, coffee, and the library's stubbornly creaky floorboards. But with every word, every fleeting glance, I felt the invisible threads of connection tighten. There was a strange electricity in the accidental touches, our hands brushing over the same page, a shoulder grazing mine as she leaned slightly to see the book cover. Each contact was small, almost casual, yet charged with unspoken meaning. My heart would thrum in those brief, silent shocks, reminding me that her presence mattered more than any ordinary encounter should. Even her laughter, soft and restrained, left me off balance. It wasn't loud or performative, just genuine, warm and knowing, like she could see through the walls I had carefully built around myself. I caught myself lingering on the way her eyes sparkled when she smiled, on the subtle curve of her lips, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear. Every detail seemed magnified, and every ordinary gesture became a secret language I was eager to decode. By the time we parted, I felt a strange mix of exhilaration and hesitation. There was excitement in discovering someone so attuned, yet a whisper of fear too, the kind that comes from knowing that feelings, once noticed, are hard to unsee. I left the library with my mind replaying her words, her laugh, the warmth of her proximity, wishing I could stretch the moments indefinitely. Later, in the quiet of my room, I realized how much I wanted these brief encounters to continue. There was a gentle pull toward her, subtle but insistent, like a quiet promise that something deeper awaited. And even though we hadn't yet shared a real secret, the smallest gestures, the brush of her hand, the way she leaned in when speaking, the warmth that seemed to linger in her presence, had already begun weaving an invisible bond between us. It was in these small, ordinary connections that I first felt the story starting, delicate and unspoken, a slow burn that whispered of possibilities I wasn't yet ready to name. And I couldn't help but wonder, what would happen the next time our worlds collided? It wasn't long before our casual encounters began to carry weight. That afternoon, we found ourselves sharing the quiet corner of a small park, with the sunlight filtered softly through the branches, casting dappled patterns on the ground. I had come to clear my mind, but seeing her sitting there, relaxed and unhurried, made the world feel both sharper and gentler at once. There was a pause in the usual rhythm of life, a space carved out just for the two of us. She started talking about something small at first, a story from her day, a memory of a childhood mishap, but there was a softness in her voice that hinted at something deeper. I listened intently, aware of the subtle rise and fall of her chest, the warmth radiating from her as she leaned slightly toward me, her hand brushing against mine as she gestured. Each movement was deliberate in its carelessness, a silent invitation to stay close, to lean in, to notice. For the first time, I sensed a real vulnerability in her. It wasn't the kind that demands sympathy or pity. It was quiet, almost fragile, like a hidden flower blooming in a shadowed corner. She spoke of moments she rarely shared, confessions wrapped in humor or understatement, letting me glimpse the parts of her that the world rarely saw. And as she spoke, I realized that this was no ordinary connection. There was trust here, something earned, not given lightly. I wanted to say something in return, to match her openness, but my own hesitations made me falter. So I spoke slowly, choosing words with care, letting her see that I was listening, that I understood without judgment. And in that shared silence, in that exchange of glances and the occasional brush of hands, something shifted. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, a recognition that we were no longer strangers, that something unspoken had begun to grow between us. Her presence was intoxicating, not in the way desire usually hits, but in a quiet, insistent pull that made me notice everything about her. The soft tilt of her head when she laughed, the way her fingers fiddled with the edge of her sleeve, the faint scent of her perfume that lingered in the air long after she moved. It all drew me in. I found myself leaning closer, my knee brushing against hers, my shoulder occasionally grazing hers, aware of the electricity that ran silently through these simple touches. By the time the sun began to dip, painting the sky in gentle oranges and pinks, there was a calm intimacy between us. We didn't need to rush into grand declarations or dramatic gestures. The moment itself felt sacred. I realized that the seed of something far more profound had been planted, a bond that thrived on subtlety, on the courage to share what is usually hidden. As we parted that evening, her smile lingered in my mind like a warm echo. I walked home with a quiet sense of wonder, my chest light, but my thoughts heavy with a new depth of connection. That day, I learned that intimacy could be found in whispered truths, in fleeting touches, and in the courage to let someone glimpse the parts of ourselves we usually guard. And I knew, with a certainty I hadn't expected, that our story was only just beginning. It was one of those evenings where the air feels heavy with quiet anticipation, the kind of moment that seems ordinary until something shifts everything. We had gone for a walk along a narrow, tree-lined path near the edge of the city, the fading sunlight brushing the leaves in gold and amber. The world around us softened, the distant hum of traffic, the occasional laughter of passing strangers. Everything became background noise to the rhythm of our steps. We walked side by side, sometimes in silence, sometimes exchanging small observations. And then, without warning, she slowed her pace, turning slightly toward me. There was a weight in her gaze I hadn't seen before, a calm intensity that made my chest tighten and my thoughts falter. She leaned in, just enough that I could feel the warmth of her breath, the gentle fall of her hair brushing my cheek. Her voice dropped to a whisper, almost fragile yet undeniably charged. "One secret won't hurt anyone." Those words struck me in a way I hadn't anticipated. It wasn't just what she said, it was the way she said it. The softness of her tone, the subtle curve of her lips, the quiet vulnerability wrapped in her confident posture. It all combined into a moment that felt suspended in time. My heart thudded with a mixture of curiosity, fear, and something deeper I wasn't ready to name. I hesitated, wanting to ask more, wanting to know exactly what she meant, but there was a magnetic pause in the air. Her eyes held mine, steady and expectant, and in that silent exchange, I realized that this wasn't a demand or a test. It was an invitation. Something daring, something intimate, quietly offered and delicately balanced on trust. The world seemed to shrink around us. I became hyper-aware of every detail. The warmth of her hand as it hovered near mine, the faint scent of her perfume mingling with the crisp evening air, the rhythmic rise and fall of her chest as she waited. The gentle sway of her hair, the tilt of her head, the slight curve of her smile. It all spoke a language that didn't need words. My fingers itched to reach for hers, to close the tiny distance between us, but I remained still, savoring the suspended tension, aware that some moments are meant to linger before crossing the threshold. A soft laugh escaped her, almost shy, and I felt a thrill ripple through me. It was a sound meant only for me, a secret shared in a language beyond words. The whisper had opened a door, a threshold into a space of quiet intimacy, where trust, curiosity, and desire intertwined. I felt the pull of something dangerous yet irresistible, the excitement of stepping closer to a bond one could feel but not yet fully define. By the time we resumed walking, my mind was a tangle of thoughts and sensations. That single whispered line, so simple, so fleeting, had shifted everything. The air between us had changed. What had been casual familiarity was now tinged with possibility, a slow-burning tension that demanded attention. I knew, even then, that our story had taken its first deliberate turn, guided by a secret and a trust neither of us could yet name, and that the moments ahead would be irrevocably different from anything I had known before. After that evening, the world seemed to shift around us in ways I hadn't anticipated. The whispered line, "One secret won't hurt anyone," had opened something fragile yet undeniable, and each encounter afterward carried a quiet charge, a slow tension that both thrilled and unsettled me. Our meetings, once casual and brief, now felt deliberately orchestrated. Shared coffees, walks along empty streets, and quiet pauses in bookstores or parks. Every moment between us became an unspoken experiment in closeness. It was during one of those quiet afternoons that the first real weight of our connection pressed against me. We had sat on a low bench by a fountain, the sun flickering across the water, and she had begun to speak of things most people keep tucked away. The loneliness of her evenings, the small regrets she carried, the subtle joys she rarely admitted aloud. Her voice was steady, calm, but there was a softness, a vulnerability that drew me in. For the first time, I realized how fully she trusted me, and in response, I felt compelled to meet her openness with my own honesty. As she spoke, I became painfully aware of every detail about her. The warmth radiating from her side as she leaned slightly toward me, the faint brush of her hair against my arm as she gestured, the softness in her gaze that seemed to hold both courage and fear. Each gesture, each nuance, made my chest tighten with awareness, an ache of longing tempered by the fear of overstepping. And yet, there was no rush, no demand, just the delicate rhythm of closeness, building layer by layer. Our hands brushed once, twice, almost accidentally, or perhaps not. Each contact sent an electric thrill through me, subtle but insistent. I became attuned to the cadence of her movements, the quiet ebb and flow of her presence, the way she seemed to anchor me even as I wrestled with my own hesitations. In these moments, intimacy wasn't about grand gestures or confessions. It was about proximity, awareness, and the courage to simply exist together, unguarded. We shared laughter too, light and soft, threading through our quiet conversations. And in those small, human moments, her eyes sparkling when she teased me gently, my shoulder brushing hers as we leaned in to hear one another over the ambient noise of the city, I felt the bond grow. It was thrilling and terrifying in equal measure, a slow burn that whispered promises we weren't yet ready to voice. By the time the afternoon faded into twilight, there was a calm intensity between us. Words felt almost unnecessary. The silence spoke volumes. I realized that our connection had transcended mere curiosity or fascination. It had become something delicate and profound, a shared space of trust and unspoken desire, where every gesture, every glance, every brush of hands was magnified by meaning. Walking home later, I replayed her words and movements over and over. The secret she hinted at wasn't just hers. It had become ours, a bridge to intimacy that neither of us could yet fully describe. And in that realization, I felt both the weight and the thrill of something inevitable. A slow, careful unraveling of emotions that would demand patience, courage, and a willingness to embrace the unknown. The days that followed were a delicate balancing act. Each encounter with her carried the warmth of familiarity, yet beneath it, a quiet tension hummed, an undercurrent that neither of us could ignore. It was one thing to share small secrets, fleeting touches, and lingering glances. It was another entirely to face the reality that our connection had grown into something undeniable, something that could not be contained by whispered confidences or casual meetings. The turning point came unexpectedly during one of those ordinary moments that felt anything but. We had gone to a small cafe, the kind tucked in a side street, with sunlight filtering lazily through the windows and the soft scent of roasted coffee beans lingering in the air. As we waited for our drinks, a mutual acquaintance walked by, smiling and chatting casually. The familiarity of her presence with me, a closeness they hadn't witnessed before, suddenly drew quiet attention. A passing comment, light but probing, made me painfully aware of the delicate, unspoken bond between us. Her hand brushed against mine, just lightly, but it was enough to remind me of every subtle touch we had shared, every fleeting moment of intimacy that had built a world between us that existed outside the eyes of others. She looked at me, eyes steady yet vulnerable, as if silently asking whether I was ready to step fully into this space with her. I swallowed, aware of the fluttering of my chest, the rapid rise and fall of my heartbeat. In that moment, words became necessary. The gentle teasing of acquaintances, the whispered curiosity of strangers, forced us into honesty. I felt the weight of my emotions pressing against me, the fear of judgment, the uncertainty of how our connection would be perceived. But looking at her, the warmth in her gaze, the subtle tension of her shoulders, the quiet steadiness of her presence, I knew that denying what we felt was no longer an option. We spoke softly, carefully, in a corner of the cafe where no one could overhear. Our voices barely rose above the hum of conversation, but every word carried the gravity of what we were admitting. She confessed her own hesitation, the fear of how others might see us, the worry that what we shared could be misinterpreted. I responded with honesty too, acknowledging my own struggle with doubt and desire, the internal push and pull between caution and the thrill of being near her. As we sat there, close enough to feel the warmth of each other's presence, the tension between us shifted. No longer was it tentative. No longer was it merely curious or playful. It became real, tangible, a quiet affirmation of the bond we had been nurturing all along. Her fingers found mine, lacing together naturally, grounding both of us in the certainty that this was not a fleeting attraction. It was connection, deep and intentional. By the time we left the cafe, the air between us had changed. Each step we took felt lighter, yet more deliberate. We had crossed an invisible threshold, acknowledging not just the thrill of our secret, but the courage and trust required to embrace it fully. In that turning point, I realized that the slow burn we had been nurturing for weeks had finally transformed into something enduring, a quiet, steady flame that neither time nor hesitation could diminish. After that turning point, the world felt subtly, irrevocably different. The quiet tension that had threaded through our encounters began to soften into something steady, something I could finally recognize as belonging to both of us. Our connection, once fragile and tentative, now had space to breathe, a shared understanding that was both exhilarating and comforting. It was a late afternoon when it all crystallized during one of our walks along the riverside. The sun hung low, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, reflecting off the water in gentle, trembling ripples. She walked beside me, her hand brushing lightly against mine, the touch casual yet deliberate, as if testing the boundaries of our comfort. I could feel the warmth of her fingers against my skin, and it sent a quiet thrill through me, a reminder that every small contact had been building toward this natural closeness. We found a bench overlooking the water, the world around us hushed as if giving us our own private space. Sitting there, shoulder to shoulder, I realized how effortless it had become to share these moments with her. There was no need for grand declarations or dramatic gestures. Our connection thrived in the subtle, ordinary acts of presence. The tilt of her head toward me, the quiet rhythm of her breathing, the faint brush of her hair against my cheek. Every detail was amplified by the intimacy we had nurtured, each gesture a testament to the trust and affection between us. She spoke softly about her day, about small victories and lingering doubts, and I listened with complete attention, feeling the depth of her vulnerability without any urge to fix or advise. In turn, I shared my own thoughts, my own hesitations and dreams, and for the first time, it felt like the walls I had built around myself could be safely lowered. There was no judgment here, only understanding, a gentle affirmation that we could be fully ourselves with one another. Eventually, she leaned slightly closer, her head resting lightly against my shoulder. The warmth of her presence, the quiet steadiness of her breath, the faint scent of her perfume, all of it wrapped around me like a soft, reassuring embrace. I rested my cheek against her hair, feeling an undeniable sense of belonging, the kind that doesn't need to be named to exist fully. It was a moment of perfect simplicity, a quiet intimacy that carried more weight than any spoken word. As we sat there, the sun slipping below the horizon, I realized that the secret she had whispered weeks ago, "One secret won't hurt anyone," had led us to something far more profound than I could have imagined. It wasn't just the thrill of hidden connection or forbidden closeness. It was the discovery of trust, of mutual care, of a bond that could thrive even in the ordinary, everyday spaces of life. When we finally stood to leave, our hands intertwined naturally. I knew that nothing had to be forced. The slow burn we had nurtured had become a steady warmth, a shared life-affirming rhythm that neither time nor circumstance could diminish. And as we walked together, side by side, I understood with complete clarity that our story had found its place, not in secrecy alone, but in the quiet, enduring intimacy of hearts that had chosen one another.